Hello, and welcome to Christian Social Ethics at Shenandoah University. I am Professor Barry Penn-Hollar, and I will be your guide through what I hope is an exciting adventure for you. It could be an exciting adventure first because the topics we'll be focused on are ones that affect all of our lives and are a moral challenge to us, especially to those of us shaped by Christian beliefs and practices. Our focus will be on the war on terrorism and global poverty. I'm also excited about this course because it's the first time I will be teaching a course through the hybrid method. That is to say, we will be mixing online forms of course delivery along with traditional classroom. We will only be meeting once a week for those of you in the 102 sections of both religion and philosophy 225. We'll only be meeting once a week on Wednesdays from 4 to 5:15. The iMovie lectures for this course will be of two types. You will always have reading assignments that accompany the lectures. Here in the first course unit, where you're being introduced to some basic concepts, to the sources of Christian morality, a Christian worldview, and the principles of love and justice, you are assigned to read materials that I have written especially for this course. The iMovie lectures will do nothing more than summarize what is in those reading materials. You will need to watch both the lectures and read the materials. Indeed, I would suggest that ideally you watch the iMovie lecture first to give you sort of a quick overview, then do the reading, and maybe come back and watch the iMovie lecture again as a way of solidifying what you've learned. You will always have then, after a lecture or two, a graded quiz to sort of measure your basic understanding of this introductory material. Later in the course, the iMovie lectures will not be a summary of any one reading. Rather, they will be the only form in which important course material is delivered to you. There will be various assigned readings associated with those lectures, and they will be background material that more fully develops what's in the iMovie lecture. This first reading and this first iMovie lecture is intended simply to introduce you to the course and to a couple of key concepts in the field of Christian social ethics. Well, let's get started by defining a few key terms. First, those involved in the title of the course, Christian Social Ethics. Many folks use the language of ethics and morality interchangeably, as if the two words mean exactly the same thing. I think they are very close related, but they don't mean exactly the same thing. In this course, ethics means critical reflection on morality, or critical reflection on the moral life. The word critical in this definition is very important. It doesn't mean finding fault, as in criticizing. Rather, here it means characterized by careful analysis and the making of judgments. Critical reflection on morality involves becoming aware of multiple perspectives. There is no single moral perspective, no single set of judgments or beliefs that people bring to bear on the moral life. Rather, different individuals in different cultures have different perspectives. Becoming aware of those different perspectives and being able to analyze and compare them is an essential part of ethics. Critical reflection also involves making our own morality, our own moral beliefs and judgments, an object of reflection. Such critical analysis depends upon our capacity for self-transcendence, our capacity to step outside of ourselves, create critical distance from ourselves, and make our own beliefs, our own values, our own judgments, our own lives an object of analysis and study. Critical reflection on our own morality means becoming aware that our own perspective is just one among many. This critical analysis involves comparing our own perspectives to those of others. This awareness that our own moral perspectives are but one among many might open us to the possibility of reforming our own beliefs in the light of things we learn from the perspective of others. We might think of ethics as an intellectual discipline or a field of study like others, such as history or psychology or ethnomusicology, or even biology. Biology, of course, is the careful, critical, analytical study of life forms. Ethics studies morality. So imagine that the person shown here is not a biologist, but an ethicist. Just like the biologist, the person doing ethics has certain critical tools, has a critical apparatus for studying his or her subject matter. So what does the ethicist have under his or her microscope? What is the subject matter under observation through the critical apparatus used by the ethicist? That's right. What the ethicist studies is morality, or the moral life. As the biologist engages in critical scrutiny of life forms, the ethicist engages in critical analysis of morality. So if ethics is critical reflection on the moral life, what exactly is the moral life, or morality, or what are its key dimensions? I think we can think of three things here. The moral life, or morality, has to do with our judgments and practices related to, first, right and wrong conduct, but secondly, also good and bad character. We don't just say that particular conduct is right or wrong. We also say that particular people are good or bad, have good or bad character. And finally, the third dimension has to do with what I call the conditions that would have to exist for our lives to be happy and whole, for us to flourish as human beings or to be fulfilled. Now, our focus in this course will be on the first aspect, right and wrong conduct. And in a couple of weeks, we'll be studying the two key principles that, from within a Christian framework, define right conduct. Those key principles are love and justice. An important distinction to make is between descriptive and normative ethics. These are two distinct modes of critical reflection. In its descriptive mode, ethics is simply trying to describe the moral life of an individual or a group. The goal is to understand why people make the moral judgments they make, why they live the way they do. A key point here is that working descriptively, the ethicist makes no attempt to evaluate or make his or her own judgments about the moral life under study, no attempt to reform it. This is sometimes called a phenomenological approach. More interesting is normative ethics. In its normative mode, ethics moves beyond mere description and attempts to actually evaluate the validity or adequacy of a person or a group's morality. We said previously that there is no single moral perspective. Ethics in its normative mode attempts to determine which among various perspectives or moralities is best or most valid. Even within a single moral tradition, there are often disagreements about important moral matters. Operating in its normative mode, the ethicist would try to resolve disagreements within a single moral tradition. Sometimes an ethicist studies a particular moral tradition, usually the one in which he or she lives, in order to push it in a particular direction, to change it, to reform it. This is to operate as well in a normative mode, rather than a merely descriptive one. When the person doing ethics engages in any of these normative tasks that I've talked about, which are shown here, he or she is said to be doing constructive ethics. No longer is the ethicist simply trying to understand the moral life. Rather, he or she is trying to influence it, to shape it, to participate as an ethicist in the human effort to live rightly. Much of what I present to you in this course will fit that description of descriptive ethics. I will simply offer you an analysis of what Christians say and do and believe, what judgments Christians make about moral matters, what we have said and are saying about the war on terror and global poverty, for example. Part of the goal of this course is for you to simply understand better, in a general sort of way, how Christians think about such matters, and to familiarize you with some of what Christians have written and are doing in relation to terrorism and poverty. So all that means we'll be doing ethics descriptively. But I will also be doing what's called normative ethics, and invite you to participate in critical reflection on the moral life in a normative way. Normative ethics doesn't just describe how people behave and what judgments they make about right and wrong. It takes a stand on a position on how people ought to live. In this course, we will be describing, analyzing, and categorizing some of the judgments that people have made about the war on terror and global poverty. But I will also take some positions of my own, and I will encourage you to thoughtfully do the same thing. That means, then, we'll be engaging in normative ethical analysis. The issues we are looking at are social ethical issues, and this is a course in social ethics. What does that mean? The best way to think of that is to draw a distinction between personal ethics and social ethics. Personal ethics is critical reflection on the moral lives of individuals, but social ethics is critical reflection on the social dimensions of morality, especially the moral dimensions of large and complex social and political arrangements or institutions. Maybe the simplest way to think about this is simply to notice the degree and the ways to which our lives are profoundly shaped by institutions and social conventions. Often when you and I act, we are doing so in conformity with the policies and practices of the institutions of which we are a part and which have some kind of authority over us. Consider the fact that all of us will show up in the same room at the same time many times throughout the semester. How do you explain that? It's not just that we happen as individuals to make a decision to go to a particular place. It has to do with the way in which education is organized through educational institutions like Shenandoah University. So, for better or worse, much of your learning occurs in the context of classes for which you are assigned grades, which determine whether or not you will get credit for a course. And if you amass enough of those credits, you will get a degree and be considered educated. So much of our individual behavior as teachers and students is shaped by the educational institutions in which we learn together. Now, let's think about this in relation to the war on terror. War is institutionally organized, governmentally organized violence for some political purpose. The moral judgments that people make one way or the other about the war on terror are judgments about the policies and practices of the United States government, other governments, and the United Nations. These are all large political institutions. Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations are institutions, even if they lack officially recognized status. Our judgments about the policies and practices of Al-Qaeda and of the United States government are judgments about institutions. They are aspects of social morality. To analyze those judgments carefully and systematically and critically is to engage in social ethics. As we will see, global poverty is largely the result of the policies and practices of governments, large economic institutions like corporations, and the overall global economic system. An appropriate response to global poverty depends not simply on what individuals do or don't do, but also on the reforming of the policies and practices of those large and complex economic institutions that create or at least shape the reality of global poverty. People have different beliefs and behaviors related to whether or not and how much they give to agencies that are trying to address global poverty. But we also have differences of opinion about whether and how governmental and corporate policies and practices should be reformed in response to the reality of global poverty. These are matters related to social ethics and not just personal ethics. This is a course in Christian social ethics. Christian social ethics is critical reflection on the social or institutional dimensions of morality from the perspective of Christian beliefs and a Christian worldview. Now, Christians live in the same world as everyone else and face many of the same challenges. But Christians have certain distinctive beliefs that are part of a somewhat distinctive worldview, and all this shapes the particular ways that Christians think about their moral obligations and social ethics. Our focus will be on what Christians have said and are saying about the war on terror and global poverty from their distinctly Christian perspective. You will be invited to make your own judgments based on a more careful and thoughtful analysis of the issues involved and of the relevant Christian beliefs related to those issues. Put differently, you'll be invited to make your own judgments about the relevance of Christian beliefs to the policies and practices of institutions in relation to terrorism and global poverty. If you consider yourself a Christian, you'll be asked to think carefully about your own beliefs and their relevance to these issues. If you're not a Christian, you'll be asked to make judgments about valid implications of Christian beliefs in relation to those issues. But you will also be given the opportunity to think about whether your own beliefs provide a more valid perspective for thinking about issues related to terror and global poverty. One of the things that will become evident to you, if it isn't already, is that Christians don't all think or behave the same way. We often disagree among ourselves about what behavior is appropriate and what commitments should have priority for us. Helping you understand Christian morality then will be helping you understand the things we disagree about and the differences among us that produce those disagreements. I will take a position on some of those matters of disagreement among Christians. In other words, in addition to helping you understand what we disagree about, I will often take sides or make a stand with reference to those things about which Christians disagree. Indeed, I'll try to persuade you to agree with me about some of those matters. Again, you should recognize that this means we will be moving beyond mere description into normative or constructive approaches to ethics. This course, quite frankly, is a part of my own commitment to shaping, influencing, and reforming Christian social ethics. I was born in 1953 and grew up in a rural village in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia here. My Christian faith was nurtured in a small evangelical United Brethren church that became, as a result of a merger, the United Methodist Church around 1970. As you might expect, if you're at all familiar with the times through which I passed as an adolescent and young adult, I first began to sense a disconnect between our faith commitments as Christians and our moral lives in relation particularly to the war in Vietnam and the civil rights movement. That sense of inconsistency on my part prompted me on a quest for a better understanding of the full and essential meaning of the Christian message and to a better understanding of the relationship between that message and our moral lives as Christian people in the United States. Since my sophomore year in college, I've been committed to understanding what it means to be a Christian. I was an economics major at the time, headed to law school and some kind of career in politics, I thought. I took a religion elective course in which we studied various expressions of Christian faith. I remember very well one day in a discussion section, there was a heated debate around the general question as to what the essence of the gospel is. I was, outwardly at least, a non-participant in that discussion, in part because I remember being unsure myself about precisely what the gospel is or what it means to be a Christian. Suddenly, and to this day I don't know how to describe it, I heard a voice or a compelling idea popped into my head. You ought to study Christianity, it said. Figure out what the gospel is, and when you do, become a preacher. The next day I filled out the form to become a religion major, and as I remember it, from that day was headed toward seminary and ordination. This course is very much a part of the fruit of that quest that was begun there in that college classroom nearly 40 years ago. It reflects my continued sense that some things are badly amiss among Christians. As well, it reflects my own deepened sense of what the Christian gospel is at its core and what that calls us to morally and in relation to issues like the war on terrorism and global poverty. As such, it reflects my sense that my life and our lives together in our various Christian communions or denominations ought to be more consistent with our faith. Our lives ought to be an essential witness to the gospel and to the God we have come to know in and through Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit that continues to move us as Jesus promised it would. I suppose that one of my goals in this course is that some of you might have an experience not unlike the one I had in a college classroom some 40 years ago. And I don't mean I want you to be hearing strange voices, but I do hope you will be inspired to think hard and deeply about what it means to be a Christian, or even just what it means to be a decent human being. And to think hard and deeply about what the implications of that are for how you and I should live in a world that includes terrorism, a perpetual war on terrorism, and millions of people living every day on the brink of starvation and death because of poverty. Before we turn to those two major topic areas in this course, we will consider a couple of other introductory matters. You have some understanding now of what ethics is and what social ethics is and what Christian social ethics is. Next, we will begin to look at what I call the sources of Christian morality and ethics, what the primary factors are that shape Christian conduct, character, and commitments. We will consider four: the Bible, Christian tradition, human reason, and human experience. After that consideration of the sources of Christian ethics, I will describe an overall Christian worldview drawn from those sources, and in particular those aspects of a Christian worldview that influence the moral life and social morality. Finally, in this introductory unit, we will look at the two moral principles most relevant to Christian morality and Christian social ethics, the principles of love and justice. Well, this is your introduction to the adventure on which we are about to embark together. Thank you.